All right, so we should be live in a few seconds. So I'll just do a sound check and then we'll be good to go.
Yeah, I can see us.
You can see us? Well, if you could see us, they could see us.
Yeah, on the Twitch.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me well? You are live. Yes, I know. Just gonna do a quick sound check, make sure you guys can hear everything, you see everything, and then we'll be good to go. We can see it.
Yep.
Hello. All right. Nice sound. Awesome. All right. Cool. All right. So we're back for Red Report episode 3, and as always, this is an interview series focused on the people and characters of poker. We will talk some strategy, but for the most part, it will be mostly about the lifestyle and characters of the game. So today we have our awesome guest, Bart Hanson. Bart Hanson, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on your show, Christian. Appreciate it. And by the way, I'm looking over the different tweets and stuff that were promoted, but I did retweet this. That's why I'm looking at my phone. And
Okay.
over at Crush Like Poker, we also do Twitch stuff too. So I'm checking out your stream on my phone too, because we had some problems last night with our mobile device or our Twitch mobile program. But it looks like you guys are all set.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I was there
Yeah.
when you were kind of like helping out, and I was trying to give as much advice as I could, but the app is very, very strange. But
Well, basically, what it is that if you're on a if you're on an iOS app or even an Android app on your computer, see, you guys are all set. I'm looking. You don't come up in channels. You come up as people, but it shows that you guys are on, and then you'll come up in channels in a minute or two. If you don't have the right settings, if the resolution of Twitch is too high, then you can't find somebody if you go and search for Twitch on your mobile phone. But it looks like you guys are all set. So
yeah, we
it took
kind
us like a
of.
week to figure that out. So.
You could have just asked, and we would have helped out.
I was asking you. You said you didn't know.
Oh yeah, well I didn't know, but I could have got the answer though. I mean, I could. All right, so now we have the great Bart Hanson. So, it's kind of ironic. I told you this briefly. Like, I used to listen to pretty much all your podcast and like everything coming up while I was like trying to get better. And I was kind of ironic that I get to interview you because I always listen to all your interviews. So, I mean, it's a pleasure to have you on for sure.
Well, yeah, thanks. I know we were saying before the show um, that I haven't done a lot of interviews like in a long, long time um, with poker people. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, occasionally, like a couple, but all those interviews back in the Poker Road days were, I think, in 2008. And I had a lot of really high level people on, so it was pretty fun. And to ask them questions, strategy questions that usually you don't get out of those guys, like Tom Dwan and
Yeah.
some of the early card runners guys. Definitely, definitely fun, definitely interesting. I feel like people don't give up as much nowadays, so I don't know how interesting a general poker interview is with somebody that's not going to talk strategy necessarily. So I
How
don't know,
do
but I'd be
how
open to it. I might try to do some more this summer again this summer.
how do you feel about that? Like, I guess before we get into everything else, how do you feel about just like, the hush hush kind of thing versus like people like you and I that have like training videos and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, if you're not making money off of it, um, I can understand why you wouldn't want to give away stuff, especially now that poker is, more and more difficult. I have been doing this for almost 10 years, and my training site, has gone really, really well. I
Hmm.
have a lot of subscribers, and it's basically just me. I mean, I have coaches, and I've got some guys that have a little bit of equity, but it's mostly me, and I make a pretty good living off of it. Now, if I didn't do that,
Right.
I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't really be that interested in doing that stuff unless it was like a monetary stream. I've got a couple of coaches and stuff that have young kids, and they enjoy doing the training and getting private clients because they don't have to play as much.
Right.
You know what I mean? And in reality, I mean, if you're up to a certain level, like my bread and butter game is 5-10 at Commerce, and sometimes I'll play 10-20. Whereas I used to always play 10, 20 years ago. And it's just a comfort level thing for me. No matter how much training that I've put out there, guys still make the same mistakes over and over again. I mean, how many people are actually training? How many people are actually studying material? There's not many. And, not to give an age stereotype, but I know actually it plays into a lot of people's hands. And some of the older guys who are subscribers of mine love this. Usually the ones who are older guys are the ones that are more recreational and aren't taking it seriously and aren't putting time to work at their game. Now, if you are an older guy and you do that, then you can really use that stereotype to your advantage, right? Because some of the younger guys like me would think, oh, this guy, he's an older guy, so he can't be any good. So it's great for those guys. And I have lots of subscribers that are over 40 and 50 years old. But, again, in general, I would say, to say like an age discrimination type of thing, I'm just kind of saying it the way that it is. If I'm sitting down at a table where there's a bunch of guys in their 20s, I'd probably rather be at a table with a bunch of guys in their 50s. With that being said, I've seen a lot of bad young players though too. So,
yeah, of course.
I mean, take it for what it's worth.
yeah. I mean, definitely the stereotypes. Like, I know if I get 3-bet by, some older guy, I'm folding everything except the top of my range. So it's like, it's definitely pretty. Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. All right, so let's get into a little bit of your background. You're kind of like a mysterious guy. Like, I kind of try to look up stuff from you, and I didn't really get anything.
Mysterious?
So, I mean, a little bit. I mean, like, I try to look up, like, where you come from and stuff, and it was pretty mysterious. So, I mean, I figure I ask and say, so for those of us who aren't as familiar with your background and, like, how you got into poker, etc., like, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I moved out here in 2005 from Boston. Well, I graduated from Syracuse in upstate New York. I lived with my parents for a year, and I moved out to LA. In the beginning of 2003, I'm sorry. Moved out to LA in the beginning of 2003. I had never played poker. I mean, I had played like 4-8 limit, like one session with my aunt at Foxwoods. I didn't know how to play poker. And I was kind of trying to do something in the entertainment industry. I'd gone to school for broadcasting, and basically I landed a really cushy bartending job for the first year and a half that I was out here when I was like 23, 22, 23. And then the poker boom hit in late 2003 when they had Moneymaker on the World Series. So then I started to play. And I was just lucky enough that I was in LA, and that's really where all the card rooms are, right? So I started playing in tournaments, started playing it more and more in 2004, and then I got a prop job at the Bicycle Casino, which, if anybody doesn't know what a prop job is, they actually pay you an hourly to help fill games, but it's usually limit. And, just by luck at that time, they started this thing called Live at the Bike, which is a webcast of, a live game in the beginning of 2005. And they didn't really have a budget to pay anybody to commentate, so they took their props and they had the props commentate while they were kind of on the clock. And I loved it because I was always in sports broadcasting, and, they thought that I was good at it. And we ended up doing that for, 2 years. Dave Tuchman and I did that 4 days a week, 4 hours a day with no break for 2 years. I didn't start playing No Limit until the end of 2005, but I hopped into 510 right away, and I was instantly really one of the best players, and that was because I had seen so many hands go down, and I had seen what the good players did, because I've been watching and commentating, and I could see everyone's hole cards, that it almost became second nature to me. Like, I kind of jumped up way ahead of people that had only really been playing for a year or two, which were most people, because No Limit really didn't start as a really popular cash game until maybe 2004. I remember when it started to spread at the Bike, 500 No Limit at the beginning of 2005. So I was way out ahead of everybody without even ever playing a hand. Yeah. So that's kind of how I got ahead in No Limit. And then Live at the Bike ended in 2007. Poker Road hired me, which was that site, Joe Seabach and Barry Greenstein, to host their main show. And then I did a cash kind of strategy show, which is where those interviews that you're talking about came about.
Cash plays.
And, I got some TV jobs and stuff like that. But then that podcast from Poker Road really kind of started me off. I went over to Deuces Cracked for a few years, and then I started my own site. And now I do, videos, podcasts, stuff like that.
All kinds of stuff. So talk to me a little bit about that broadcasting stuff. I know, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I've seen you on TV at some point. Maybe.
Yeah, I did some. Well, I mean, I made a couple final tables. Well, I made one final. You know what actually got me probably noticed for the Poker Road job was that I got on a final table in 2007. A big, like it was the biggest non-main event tournament at the time. It was a 1,500 no limit before they did Million Makers and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was like maybe one that had 3,000 people in it. And I made a televised final table, which they don't do anymore. They don't televise these sub events anymore. And yeah, even though I got eighth, I guess it was like a good story and stuff. And because I was a broadcaster, podcaster, and I kind of had just a good TV showing.
Right.
And that got me there. And then I did commentary for this show called ClubWPT.com, which didn't really amount to anything. It was kind of it was one season, although Club WPT is still around.
Yeah.
But I did commentary for the Aussie Millions, I think, in 2009, which really is like one of the best poker shows if anybody goes and takes a look and search for it, because it was half PLO, half no limit. And there were a few episodes where it was heads up between Dwan and Antonius. That was the entire show.
Yeah, I saw that.
HA heads up between Dwan and Antonius. Really interesting. It was really interesting because Dwan made some really, really big laydowns heads up in PLO and in no limit.
Yeah, with
against Antonius, and he was right all the time.
Yeah, I think one of them was with bottom set of sixes, I believe. And then Antonius had like top set, and then at the river he just bet folded or something like that. It was huge. I mean, he got buried in that game, but he played amazing. I remember that. It was really.
It was yeah, I remember actually that hand where I think Antonius had flopped top set of aces. He had 3-bet from out of position. Dwan called. Dwan had sixes in his hand and 2 other cards. I don't remember the 2 other cards. It went check on the flop. Antonius checked the flop, and Dwan checked it back, and then Dwan hit a set of sixes on the turn, and then it went bet, raise, 3-bet from Antonius, and Dwan called. And then the river didn't really change much, except that it brought a wheel in, a bottom end of a wheel, and Antonius didn't have the nuts anymore. But he bet, and then
Dwan mucked it.
Dwan folded. But there was a more interesting laydown I remember from when in Hold'em, Dwan like folded a 1-card straight like against Antonius, who had the nut straight, which I thought was pretty incredible. Like it went check on the turn when both players had a straight. Antonius bet the river, Dwan raised, Antonius 3-bet, and Dwan folded in Hold'em a straight, and Antonius had like the nut straight, like on a middling board.
Yeah, I remember all those hands. I must have watched those replays a couple times.
Yeah.
So, kind of back to your podcast thing. Is there any like favorite podcast that you did, or any interview that you remember that you kind of feel proud of?
Well, people like to talk about the first Simoleus interview that I did, which was really the first interview that I did actually back. That was really early. All this stuff can actually be found, all these old interviews on my site, on Crush Like Poker. If you just go there and you go to podcasts and you go to cash plays, they're all free. Simoleus from like maybe March or April of 2008. He was this guy, Punkety. He used to coach for Blue Fire. I don't know what he's really up to now. I actually did an internet search for him. I don't know if he's playing that much, but he was a beast back in the day, online and live. He would actually only go play live. He was from the Boston area, so he would only go play live when Foxwoods was doing like their tournament series. One they did in October, and I think one in April.
Yep.
That was the time that he got away from online poker. He would go there. And so I had a chance to interview him because a mutual friend of mine knew him. And he talked about playing deep in no-limit games and about how if you were not prepared to fold certain hands, certain strengths of hands, then you really shouldn't be playing deep. How deep do you need to be folding middle set, bottom set? Do you need to be putting in the 4th, the 5th, the 6th bet pre-flop when you're deep with aces, kings, to kind of protect and balance your range pre-flop? It's quite enlightening stuff, and I think that people hadn't really heard strategy discussed about deep stack no limit, at that level.
Yeah, no, I think that was really good. I like I said, I told you the Simoleus series I think had like 4 parts or something like that. And it was really good. It was definitely really, really good.
Well, I did one back with him, the first one, and then I did like a 2-parter like in September or something of that year too.
So like you briefly mentioned that they could find it on your Crush Live Poker website. So there was an interesting back and forth with someone recently saying that they couldn't find it, etc.
With Kessler?
Yeah, with Alan Kessler. So, can you briefly like talk about what just happened there? Because
No,
the thread
I
was
mean,
really long.
I am absolutely blessed that, when before Crush Light Poker, the name of the site was called seedopenpoker.net. It was really, the content was the same, but it was really a heaping pile of shit, basically, the way that the website was built. And I had problems. Like, people couldn't load stuff, and I kind of put it out there on one podcast, does anybody know about system administration that can possibly help me? And, just somehow it worked out like a hand of God. My buddy and business partner now, Andrew, came in and basically he rebuilt my site, and he knows so much about web design, back end system administration, everything. That he spent so much time making everything very, very like mobile capable, very like SEO friendly, stuff like that. So whenever anybody like Kessler wanted to find the Matt Savage interview, and he was like, "Oh, Crush Light Poker it's horrible. It's not mobile user friendly." So I'm not going to let that stand because I know it's 100% wrong. And I told Kessler via Twitter, you can stack up all of the analytics between Crush Live Poker and every other training site. I didn't mention Red Chip Poker, by the way. You guys actually rank pretty high too.
Thank you.
But like Card Runners, DC, Ivy Room, and we are way out in front in almost every single category in terms of speed, mobile, being able to navigate mobile, just everything about that's good about a website. We're way out in front, and it's true. And Kessler just couldn't load. First of all, he didn't understand that he had to press play to play the podcast. He kept pressing listen to this podcast, and it kept like sending him back to the podcast page, and he couldn't figure out that he needed to click play. And then there were sometimes that like his page, his phone, for whatever reason, he was either on like a Wi-Fi or his 4G, it just wasn't loading the page.
Yeah.
So my gripe is that he's got a bunch of followers. So why shout out? And of course this is, and I play right into his hands because Savage told me this too. He's just such a complainer and a whiner.
Yes.
Why shout out to his 50,000 followers that Crush Live Poker is, a horrible site that's not mobile, mobile friendly and hard to navigate, when it's just flat out not true because he's an idiot. I mean, that's really what the answer is, So
yeah, I mean, it was definitely a long thread. It was a long thread. I read it all, and I was like, oh my god, this is turning into something crazy. But it got a lot of attention. So I mean, I figured I had to ask you.
Yeah.
So back into your like podcasting, does it creep you out a little bit when players say they fall asleep listening to your voice?
I actually have had several. I've had I've had girlfriends of guys that don't really play poker come up to me without their guys there and say, "Are you Bart Hanson? I fall asleep to your voice. I don't play poker, but my boyfriend and my husband always puts it on when we go to bed, and it's soothing." I've gotten that from women and from men multiple times. No, it doesn't really creep me out. I guess it's something that you could fall asleep to. I don't think that necessarily means that it's boring. It's just, it's all one level. It's not, there aren't any sound effects or anything like that. So I can see that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Because I've heard of that like a couple times. Like people mention that they fall asleep to the sound of your voice, and I'm like,
I read an article too somewhere. Sometimes, I always go to bed with the television on.
Mm-hmm.
I always have to have something on when I go to sleep, and it actually happened to me like the other night too. My dreams, if I remember my dreams, they're sometimes warped by what is on in the middle of the night on the television. Like I wake up and I'm like, oh, that's an odd dream, and then I looked and saw that what was on like in the middle of the night, and I read an article somewhere about how sometimes passive listening to things while you're like in a state of trance or like a not necessarily a REM sleep, you can still pick up some things subconsciously in your brain.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe it's a good idea.
Maybe it helped a bunch of poker players to listen to you.
Yeah.
All right, so let's switch over to sports. You're a little bit of a big sports guy. So Tom Brady or Peyton Manning?
Well, I'm from Boston, so definitely Tom Brady. Peyton Manning, So I was, showing you pictures last night. I was at the Kansas City game that the Patriots got destroyed on Monday night. This was right when the Royals were making their run during the wild card. David Tuchman and I, we went to Kansas City, and they got annihilated, and that brought them to 2-2. And then people were talking about how Brady was done, and Peyton Manning, of course, was playing well at the time. Brady's done. Get him out. And then Belichick was like, we're on to Cincinnati, which I think is going to become like a sports lexicon. We're on to Cincinnati. Meaning we're just going to move on, right?
Right.
And then after that game, they win basically all the rest of their games for the season, except losing at Green Bay one game. Win the Super Bowl, and now there's questions in Denver about like if Peyton Manning should even come back, like how much time does he actually have? And his ball looks pretty like fluttery, I will say. Tom Brady doesn't look like he's lost anything in the way that he's thrown the ball. I've seen every single Patriots game for the last 25 years. We used to have season tickets when they were bad, like in between the 86 Super Bowl and when Parcells came in 93. We used to go to every game when they were like 2-14 with like Dick McPherson. Someone talking about Syracuse in the chat. Dick McPherson's a old Syracuse coach. So I've seen every game, and Brady doesn't look like he's lost anything.
Yeah,
and the Peyton Manning looks like he's about to
fall
basically
over.
hit the wall. Yeah, he's done.
So you live in Los Angeles, right? And there's been a lot of talk of a football team in Los Angeles. Would you like to see a football team in Los Angeles? And if so, would you root for them equally as the Patriots?
I don't know. That's interesting. I mean, I'll believe it when I see it. It hasn't happened in 20 years. But I think I would like to. Excuse me 1 second.
No problem.
Sorry. Just coming off of like a little bit of a cold that I kind of got during the main event at the LAPC, or it made it worse. They keep those rooms so cold. But yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. Wouldn't mind getting into an expansion team, especially like if it happens after Brady and Belichick leave. And then it's like, all right, I'll get into like a new team. You know what I mean? But I don't know. They're talking about the Chargers coming up. They're talking about building a stadium like next to Staples. They're talking about building a stadium next to Hollywood Park, if anyone's familiar with the Inglewood in LA. They're talking about possibly like building it out in Carson. I had heard, obviously I wasn't in LA when the Raiders and the Rams were here, but I heard that like going to Raiders games was not a fun experience. Like it was a lot of like, if you remember like the gangs and stuff from the late 90s or late 80s and early 90s with like all the Raiders colors and stuff.
Yeah.
I heard it was just very, very like not fun, like almost like a battleground. That doesn't sound like an idea of fun for me. But then again, like the Rams when they played in Anaheim, that was fine too. So who knows? I don't know. But I'll always be with Brady and Belichick. But they could be there for another 5 years. But then their defensive coordinator, Matt Patricia, will probably take over too. He's like a genius. He's literally like a rocket scientist. He became a football coach instead of becoming a rocket scientist. He went to RIT in Rochester and graduated with like a rocket science like master's degree and decided that he wanted to be a football coach. But he's like the best guy that like breaks down videos and stuff. So he's like an up and coming guy for sure.
Yeah, they definitely work hard up there for sure. So let's go to Lyman. Lyman's like one of my favorite guys. So he's definitely a character. He has a great podcast and called The Lyman Show. So you guys should definitely check that out if you haven't already. How did you two meet?
How did Lyman and I meet? Well, he was playing 5'10" in like 2009 for his main game. So we had a mutual friend that introduced us, and then I just asked him if he wanted to come on the Deuces Crack podcast, and that's kind of what happened. And then everyone loved him, so we had him on more and more. And then when I started my own site, I said, hey, do you want to do your own podcast on the site? And he's been going we've been Crush Light Poker since January of 2013. So he's an interesting, very polarizing character. I'm talking about polarizing like in poker. A lot of the younger guys don't like him because they think that he's just some old bitter codger that can't beat the games. But in reality, and some of the I don't know if like a guy like Ed Miller's listening to this, or if any of the guys from Red Chip have been around for a long time. There aren't many people that gambled for a living that were around pre and post poker boom and are doing okay, or doing fine, or have made enough money where they can, retire off of.
Yeah.
Like Lyman. So that being said, in itself is an accomplishment, because it's probably to get less to do with the actual poker playing skill and more to do with the way that you manage money and don't get scammed, handle yourself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what ends up happening is that, part of the problem in this industry is you can't really trust anybody. I mean, I've got a couple of close friends, Lyman, Dave Tuchman being two of them. And, but besides that, it's just,
It's tough.
It's very, very tough. You can have poker friends and stuff, but I wouldn't get too chummy with guys when it comes to money, because I've seen a lot of stuff go down.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. So I've seen your full page card player ad. It's just you and Crush Live Poker and you playing. So when is Lyman gonna get his full page card player ad?
I don't think that anybody would know who that is, though. Personally, I mean, the hair and stuff, like, maybe, but I don't know. I mean, I think we're probably going to run some ads. I actually sent an email to my administrator this morning about running some more card player ads. We are getting a booth again at the series, and then we're actually running live ads too during the stream. And so I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if we could throw Lyman in on an ad with his big hair or something like that. But we ran several different ads last year.
So I'm sure there are many stories, but can you tell us the funniest Lyman story?
The funniest Lyman story. Well, it's kind of copying from his stories. Like, there were two interesting stories that he told about stuff at the table, where one is just kind of like really, really bizarre, where, well, it's just kind of disgusting, where he told the guy that he would get, this is at Commerce, right? They have plastic chips, these $5 plastic chips, just gritty and grimy and disgusting, right? I don't know, he was getting into it with some guy, and he told him that he would give the guy the amount of yellow chips, which are $5 chips, that he could fit in his mouth if he ate the chips. And the guy took the chips and put them in his mouth, like 15 chips, and then spit them out at the table. And he gave him $75 for that, which is just, how far can you go for money?
So disgusting.
And then there was another time when there was this like old Asian guy that wanted to kill Lyman because he thought that Lyman had angled him in a bad beat jackpot, when in fact Lyman didn't know really what the qualification for a bad beat jackpot was, because he had always played 10-20, and they had just opened 5-10 up like in 2008. So he thought that it was like aces full of anything beaten by quads. And he got into a situation where he had aces full of like fives or something like that. Like the board was like ace, 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 deuce, three or something like that, right? And it was obvious that the old guy had like a pocket pair above tens. So if Lyman did have, it was ace, ace, deuce, nine or something like that. So if Lyman did have an ace with a better kicker than nine, it would be the bad beat jackpot.
Right.
And it was very obvious that the old guy had tens plus. So the old guy checked, and Lyman moved all in for like a couple $1,000s. And the old guy was like, "Why would you do that? What? I'm not going to call. Why would you do that?" And then Lyman was like, "Well, of course you're going to call, because if you call, you win the jackpot. So why wouldn't you call?" And Lyman's just kind of trying to give his, trying to get the most expected value from this guy. Lyman thought it was a jackpot.
Right.
And so the guy called, and Lyman turns over ace five, where his kicker doesn't qualify. And the guy basically threatened to kill him. He's like 5'1". Sometimes he's got like one of those things. He's got like one of those like 2-foot hairs that comes out of it, like a mole in his cheek, like one of those guys. Wanted to slit his throat. But it was, I guess, pretty funny to Lyman at the time, but he wasn't really trying to angle the guy. But those stories have been told on my podcasts. Probably that's better by Lyman than by me.
Those are pretty funny, especially the one with the chips. That's so disgusting.
Yeah.
So let's go to David Tuchman, which is another one of your good friends. I would say that he's one of the most recognizable voices in the game right now. How did you two meet?
We met at the bike. He was a prop at the bike, like I said before. He was a prop at the bike, and before I was there, I became a prop in 2005. He was already there at the end of 2004, and then we just basically ended up being the best at commentating live at the bike in early 2005. And then he actually got some broadcasting work from that as well, where they started this show called $1 Million Cash Game. It was Full Tilt in England. And we kind of knew the producers over there, and it's a long story. Jesse May, this was back in 2006. Jesse May asked for too much money, so they brought one of us over. He knew the guy better than me. He got the job, and that actually, so he did poker over there for Sky. Then he got a gig over there doing NASCAR, even though he didn't know much about NASCAR, but he learned it very quickly. And then he got a gig doing NFL work over there too, because basically in England, they have a shorter commercial cycle than we do in the States. So if you watch the NFL on Sky in England, you'll see the American commentators commentate on the game, but they have to fill extra time in the hour because they don't have as many commercials.
Right.
So they throw it back to the English studio. And also, like, they do halftime and, like, pregame. They do their own halftime and their own pregame.
Oh,
so Dave is kind of like one of the studio analysts that does that. And sometimes I'll know people that will see him because guys will try to torrent, like, the NFL streams. Like, they won't have DirecTV. And usually where the torrent comes from is the British broadcast. So you'll see him on there. So he's gotten a lot of work in England and stuff, actually, from Live at the Bike. And he spent some time over there living there for a few years. But he's back in LA now.
Awesome. I think that's pretty cool. I mean, I've definitely listened to him in multiple venues of poker, so I mean it's pretty awesome. So let's move towards Macau. I tend to have a pretty good memory, and if I remember a long time ago, you saying that you went to Macau to coach what I believe is probably a very wealthy person. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I actually went to China. God, I've been there at least 10 times. I had somebody contact me who was a subscriber to my site, who's actually now a very close friend of mine, from San Francisco, telling me that he had a business partner in China that plays really high stakes and needs lessons. So I went over there for the first time at the end of 2012. He really liked me. I ended up going over there and teaching him multiple times, and then he referred me to some of his friends. So I ended up having maybe 4 or 5 clients, and I've probably gone over there 10, 12 times in the last maybe 2.5 years. It might be kind of all over though now, because just like everything else, the cycle of poker, when the guys got busted in Vegas for the sports gambling out of Caesars, I knew some of those guys. I'd never taught them. They had been busted before in Macau for doing the same type of thing, and it kind of had been thrown out of the country, because Macau is a whole different thing, even though it's technically a part of China. It's its own municipality or principality, like Hong Kong is. Like, you have different passports and stuff.
Okay.
So these guys weren't allowed back into Macau. So that super high stakes game kind of moved. And then I think it's a combination of a lot of the rich business guys lost a lot of money, and now the game has really slowed down, and they barely even do it that much, anymore. These were never public games. Macau had really, really good no-limit games when they first introduced it, I think back in maybe 2009, 2010.
Right.
But the times that I went over there, and you can ask other people that have been over there, the public games, which are all at the Wynn in Macau, they are god-awful. It's all white Europeans.
Wow.
Playing like no-limit games that are, higher than you can get in LA. Like the equivalent of like 50, 100, 100, 200 no-limit. But the rake is like $26 a hand. So, I mean, it maxes out at $26 a hand.
Yeah.
So, I saw a lot of guys that I saw over there at first in 2012. They're back over here in LA. Macau's, I love traveling. Macau's an interesting place, but it's like one of these things that maybe you go on the ferry for an afternoon and just check it out. It's not, you don't take a vacation to Macau. It's nothing like Las Vegas. It's all gambling and prostitutes. They have no shows, no clubs. The food, I'm a huge foodie. The food kind of sucks. I mean, it's good Cantonese food like you can get in Hong Kong, but like their native like Macanese food, which is like a cross between Portuguese and Chinese, is kind of garbage. So there isn't. I don't. When people ask me about Macau, I say don't bother. Go to Hong Kong and then check it out for one afternoon. But I would never stay overnight there or anything like that.
Cool. So let's go to another city. Your now home city, Los Angeles. So Los Angeles is widely known as like pretty much the best city to play poker right now in the United States. There's some argument that Miami's pretty good now too, but why do you think that Los Angeles just happens to get the best games all the time?
Well, I mean, it's been around for the longest time. I mean, the card room. I mean, where they started back in '88, um, having card rooms, having Hold'em, legal. So, I mean, I don't know exactly why it is, but it's the most. I mean, obviously, Las Vegas is 10 times bigger. Excuse me, Los Angeles is 10 times bigger than Las Vegas, if not more, right, in terms of metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And before it was like 20 times bigger before Las Vegas grew. So, Las Vegas is based around tourists. There's just not as many people there, right? And LA, I mean, you've got the second biggest area in the entire U.S. So, they've got a head start on all the other areas in the country. It seems like every state is almost now legalizing some form of casino gambling, but there's a tradition for playing poker in Los Angeles. So it's a combination of largest area and been around the longest.
Yeah, for sure. Have you ever played at any of the private Los Angeles games?
I have played in some of the private Los Angeles games. For the most part, I really do stay away. I just, it's one of these things where there were a couple guys that actually had some really good ideas or that made themselves a lot of money and still do. That, if you want to attract the rich business guy that doesn't necessarily want to play in the casinos, they're going to lose anyways. Well, the rich business guy, they don't care about the amount of rake that they pay because they're going to lose anyways. They just want a really good experience. Maybe they don't want to drive down to the casino. They want to be in a nice $1 million house, be treated really, really well. So that's kind of what came about out of the private games. So people started doing these private games. The private games just raked like crazy. So unless you have some sort of crazy like rake back deal with the proprietor, it's not really worth it to really ever play in a private game. And people actually finally have come around to actually recognizing that. And the only guys that you really see who play in these private games anymore are really the pros that are kind of in with the proprietor, where they're not really playing on their own money. They're almost like props, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to go there and play on your own dime when there's always the chance that something could happen where you get stiffed or you get robbed or cheated and play with these ridiculously high rakes, what's the point?
Yeah, for sure. It's like that here in New York City too. Since we don't have a casino in New York City, there's a bunch of like private games, and then they rake like 10% no cap, which is like unbelievable. You can imagine a $2,000 pot they take out $200. I mean, it's really absurd. Um, so you've played plenty at the bike, and one of the characters they feature the most is Big Harry. So have you played any memorable pots with Big Harry, or do you know any stories that you could tell us about Big Harry?
Well, I mean, he's on Live at the Bike like every single Tuesday
Yeah.
on the this thing. I mean, he plays in some enormously big pots. Him and I, it's interesting. Him and I were really buddy, and he's like one of the few guys that, for some reason, and I almost never do this with anyone, we don't have a ton of action with each other, which is why I don't. It's actually the main reason why I don't play on a lot of the big games. At Live at the Bike when he's on the table, because it's just one of these things that's just came about, and it's partly my fault that we're just kind of buddies, that we've been buddies for a long time and we don't have a ton of action, so I feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. Because I don't know, it's not even necessarily, it's just like one of these things where, he's very, I don't know how you describe it, he's kind of like an honorable guy, and I've seen him sometimes get upset at guys that play hard at him when he thought that they don't play hard with each other. So I tend to shy away sometimes from. I don't. So the answer to your question, I don't really play in big pots against him all that much.
Yeah.
But I mean, he plays in. I mean, the thing that makes him a really, really tough recreational player to play is that he, um, he is like well balanced, whether it's accidentally or intentionally, where he's capable of running gigantic bluffs. He's a smart player, but he also like plays like his value hands for maximum too.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't pin him as like a typical recreational player that's going to fall into a certain pattern. It's just not true. I mean, he does play a lot of hands pre-flop, but he plays post-flop well enough to sometimes get away with playing a VPIP of like 40% or whatever.
Yeah, I mean he's definitely capable of almost anything. I've watched him a couple times, and he's capable of anything. He's not like he's kind of like a semi-pro, so to speak. I mean he's pretty good in some
Yeah, I
spot.
mean he's definitely not a pro. He's going to tell you. I mean he plays for fun.
Yeah,
He's got businesses here in LA, but he certainly enjoys it. And he enjoys the whole experience and stuff.
yeah,
Um, he enjoys being on the show, but he's definitely adds a flavor to the show because he will get into it with the pros, especially if they're young guys, that he thinks are disrespecting him. And, he'll cover anybody, up to a certain level. I mean, usually live at the bike is at most 25-50 on special times. It's usually 5-10 or 10-20. So, he'll cover anyone with any amount of money, and
yeah.
it's in play. It's not
Hmm.
like it's just sitting there with some guys. That's just like a show.
No, it's in play for sure.
Yeah.
So talking about deep games, you play in plenty of uncapped games. Um, so getting into a little bit of strategy, I'd say, can you give the viewers some of the biggest differences that between like capped and uncapped, but more importantly, like what are some of the biggest mistakes that like a person that's used to playing 100 BBs now is sitting with 300, 400 BBs? What are they likely to make?
Well, I mean, I always say that deepness usually, I like to play a deeper game and you have more options, deep with the ability to make some pretty extreme bet folds or raise folds. Whereas when you're playing a shallower stack, sometimes you're not able to bet as thinly, or you can't make some really, really thin raises because you're not going to be able to fold if somebody comes over the top. So traditionally, people look at playing deep as, oh, well, A, you can get a lot of money if the guy can't get away from a hand, right? Which is still true. But B, you can put a lot of pressure on him too. I don't really tend to see people put tons and tons of pressure on people that are deep. I mean, when I sit at 10-20, there are guys that sit very, very deep. But a lot of times they're the nittier guys where, again, the money's not in play. Like, they're never really leveraging their stacks, with a few exceptions.
Right.
G-Man, if people know that, being one of them. But I really prefer. And then sometimes people actually get on me and they're like, oh, yeah, Carside Poker says bet fold, raise fold. I'll just raise them all the time. And it's like, well, your line's got to make sense to do that. I actually played a ridiculous hand in the third level of the LAPC on Saturday where I basically flatted a guy with pocket kings in level 3. And there was 4 people in the hand. The board came out king 8 deuce with 2 spades, so I flopped top set. And this guy bet the flop. And I had a couple short stacks behind me.
Mhm.
So I just called.
Right.
And usually I don't slow play, but I thought maybe one of these guys would shove or something like that. They both got out of the way. The turn was a 10, so it was king 8 deuce, 2 spades. The turn was a 10. This guy bet again. So he's betting into 3 people on the flop, and he's betting the turn. So he has to have something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whether it be aces or ace king or probably not tens because he wouldn't bet the flop. So I raised the turn. So he bet the turn. I raised the turn. He bet like 1,700. I made it 4,800, and he called.
Mhm.
And there was front door spades on the flop. And the river was an ace, so it was king 8 deuce 10 ace.
Right.
And I was saying to myself, no spade, no spade, because when he called my raise on the turn, I'm like, this guy's got aces. He's got ace king, or he's got like a combo spade draw, like ace jack of spades, ace queen of spades, something like that, right? So I'm like, no ace, no ace, no ace. I mean, excuse me, no spade, no spade, no spade. So the river comes off an ace, and he thinks about it for a long time, and he checks to me, and I'm like, well, obviously, I need to make a bet. The pot ended up being about 15,000, and I was like, I even hesitated, and I was like, this is a tournament. Like, is this ever a check behind here? Because I lose to pocket aces now some of the time, and queen jack suited, queen jack of spades specifically. And I was like, no, I can't check it back. That's too much of a check because I can get called by ace king
Yeah.
and sometimes ace jack and ace queen of spades.
Exactly.
But I was like, you know what? If I bet here and the guy ships, I have to fold.
Mhm.
Because there's no way I can have the best hand.
Yeah.
So even though that's a tournament, it's the same concept
Same concept.
in a cash game. Like if you're playing 100 big blinds deep there, you don't have the ability to leverage a stack like that where you can make a big bet fold like that at the end.
Yeah.
I ended up betting about 7,000 into 15, and the guy took like forever looked at my stack. I thought he was going to check raise me all in. That's what it looked like. And he ended up just calling. He just called. And I'm like, all right, well, then I must be good. No, the guy had a set of aces. Now, I think he made a mistake in the sense
he
that...
should definitely be
Yeah, I mean, he really made a mistake in the sense that he only loses to Queen Jack of Spades.
Mm-hmm.
And he beats deuces, he beats eights. Forget about the fact that I probably don't have kings all that much.
Mm-hmm.
But, now I'm saying that I would have folded to his ship, but it's a tournament. 99.9% of those guys aren't going to fold. So if you river a set of aces there, if I'm in his spot, absolutely I'm check raising all in or check raising because I never expect the guy to be able to fold a set there. There's no way. You know what I mean? I mean, even though it's a 10K, it's just not going to happen. So I thought that he actually underplayed or misplayed his hand.
For sure.
But I was prepared to fold at the end, though. So that kind of gets to your question about, bet fold. And again, when people get on me and they say, oh, you just always, bet fold. No, it needs to make sense. No one's ever going to, he's never bluffing in that spot on the river. He's not check raising the river with, say, Queen 9 of Spades or something like that all in. Right. To get me off of a set. That dynamic just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So when people say that, oh, it's exploitative to be able to fold a set of kings there because I can just basically raise you off of anything that's the nuts, well, that might be true in theory, but the line has to make sense, and people just don't do it in reality.
Right. They don't do it, especially. Yeah. Yeah, it's not like he's going to turn, ace jack, and turn it into a bluff. It just doesn't happen often enough for you to even worry about it. So let's talk about PLO. So it's rumored that you're kind of one of the guys that starts the big PLO games. So
that's not true. I don't know where you go. I saw that in your list of questions before, but that Abe actually hosts the PLO game at the bike. So you might have got Lyman. You might have got confused with him and I. I don't play a lot of PLO. I mean, I have my own. It's kind of a dig at Lyman when I talk about. I tell people that the guys that play PLO were never really that good at Hold'em. Now that's not true, but I say it. I did see a lot of people transition to PLO that weren't the best no limit players, and that's why they transitioned to PLO. And then some of them became really good PLO players. And apparently, now I'm not a really good PLO player. I mean, I can beat the game. I've put in close to 1,000 hours at 510. I can't beat it for as much as I do in no limit. There's no way. It also drives me nuts because it's so slow in a live format. I mean, so slow. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, too. When I remember actually discussing this with somebody. I think it might have been on Chicago Joey's podcast because he's a PLO player. Even if your win rate is 1.5 times at the same level in PLO as it is in no limit, I think you might make less money in PLO because you see less than 1.5 times the hands in live PLO. So if you're talking about a win rate of per hand as opposed to per hour, it could still be higher in no limit because the game just moves so much faster. But yeah, I've never really taken a crazy amount of time to study PLO all that much just because the no limit games are always good here in LA, and I don't really play uncapped no limit that much anymore. I love the 1500 cap game at the Commerce because I feel like I can win maybe 85% of the hourly that I would at 1020. I don't get into any difficult spots. The variance is maybe 4 or 5 times less than it is at 1020. And there's something to be said about playing in a cap game. Now it's 150 big blind cap game, but there's something to be said about playing in a cap game where if you win and you have a lot of chips in front of you above the cap, it puts the fear of God into players. If you go over to 1020, just because you have a lot of chips in front of you, it doesn't mean anything because you could have bought in for those chips. Right. But if you're sitting at 510 with $9,000 in front of you, well, everyone can only start with 1,500. So you must have won those chips. And even though the other guy might only have 1,000 in front of him or 1,500 in front of him, it really is like an image thing where it really puts the fear of God. And that's why at 510, if you do have a big session, I always tell my students, or any other capped game, those are the times to stay longer.
For sure.
Because in a capped game, the more chips you have in front of you, I really think the higher your hourly will be. Even though, in reality, the effective stacks are all the same, but it's more of an image type of thing.
Yeah, I call that fear equity. That's what I call
it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. So do you play any games that are not no limit?
Yeah, I play 08 is my other big time game. I'll play that in the cash game at the the thing about limit poker is you're never really gonna. I mean, that's the other thing about no limit that's great. Like, it's really tough to make as much money in limit poker as it is in no limit. Like, I don't, even though I enjoy Omaha 8, I still will make more money at 5-10 no limit than I will at 40-80 Omaha 8. But at the series, I'll play 75, 150 to 100, 200 kill limit, and that's a big game, and that's fun. And I'll play that over the summer, and I've done well in that game over the last 7 or 8 years. This year, though, to promote the site, I doubt I'm actually going to play in any cash games at all. I'm going to be putting together a very, very big package for my World Series, which is kind of kind of a benefit to subscribers. I sell myself at no markup at all for all my events, for people that have subscribed to the site for like 3 months or more. And I'm going to play in a ton of events. Not necessarily because it's like an enjoyable for me, but it's just, it's weird, owning a cash game training site. Why it should matter if I make the final table of a $10,000 Raz event really shouldn't, right?
Right.
But it does, but it does. Like, get yourself in the news. Playing next to Phil Ivey at a final table like I did a couple years ago gets you in the news. You know what I mean? Especially when they had that big bracelet bet going on. So it's great promotion, for the site. I play in a lot of those mixed games anyways. So this summer is going to be like a crazy, crazy schedule of tournaments, and I'm just not going to really mix it with cash. I think I burnt myself out a little bit too much last year. I also have to manage my people at the booth and, dealing with all the other business stuff that goes along with everything.
For sure. So, I mean, No Limit's obviously the primary game. Do you have any tips for people that are mainly play No Limit but want to look into playing other games like 08, etc.?
Do I have any tips for them?
Yeah, like if I'm, for example, if I'm a primarily No Limit player and I want to play like the 08 game, like you said, right? How would I go? Like, what's the best way for me to learn how to play that game?
It's tough because 08, people always ask me about 08, about, are there any good books on 08? I've never really seen any good books on 08. I've seen some good book, like Ray Z's book. I have it over here. I've got a gigantic, look at this. Let me see.
Library?
Do this in real time. Oh, that's my Thunderbolt cords are all like, I don't know if this is going to work. Let's see here.
Don't drop it.
Yeah, I can't turn because my Thunderbolt display. But anyways, I got my whole bookshelf is all poker books. But this book here, I don't really like the 08 portion of it, but I do like the Stud 8 portion of it, High-Low Split Poker.
Sweet.
By Ray Z. But I mean, like, how many Stud 8 games are you going to see around anyways? It's tough. I mean, I make 08 videos on my training site, and I think that would help a lot.
Cool.
As far as other games, I mean, that's really all that's really played, right? I mean, Limit Hold'em, I mean, there's plenty of older material out on Limit Hold'em. PLO, I mean, Jeff Wang's book kind of gets you going, but PLO is more of a people's game as opposed to I think a strategy game, which may be partly why I haven't done crazy well in PLO, because maybe that's one of my weaknesses in the sense of not super in tuned to some of the short-term dynamics of what's going on at the table. Sometimes, with all the other stuff that goes on in my life outside of poker at the table, sometimes I'm, maybe I'm a little bit guilty of being on autopilot, which for Hold'em is not really the worst thing. But for PLO, I think in more of a people's game, more of a reading game, it's probably going to be better that you're more in tune.
For sure. So before we take before we take some Q&A, I want to talk briefly about Crush Live Poker, right? Which is like your baby, So for those who don't know what Crush Live is, can you give us an idea about like what it is, how did you start it, etc.?
Well, it's a training site that's specifically made for live. Mostly, it was made for live no limit cash. Still, 80-90% of it is live no limit cash. Podcasts and training videos. The training videos are done over a live at the bike video, so it's an actual training video over an actual poker game, an actual no limit cash game. We have hopefully some very exciting news coming up, hopefully in the next few weeks, where we're going to actually be getting new content or a new content provider where we're going to be doing training videos over an entirely new show. I can't say what that is yet, but hopefully that will come through, and that will be kind of exciting. So, anyways, yeah, it's training videos actual over live poker, and that was the whole concept, was that live poker is different from online poker.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I started this stuff way back when, you could still play online poker, right?
Right.
Now, live poker is pretty much the only option for most of us, but it's definitely different, and the bad recreational players fall into a lot of consistent patterns. So that's basically what I try to teach in a lot of my material, is the consistent patterns that they fall in and the best approach, to the live poker game. But I've got David Chan, David Tuchman, Lyman, Asa from 2+2, which has got that long thread. He does PLO videos, and then Corwin Cole does some tournament stuff for us as our coaches, and then I do every other No Limit video.
Mm-hmm.
I do 08 videos, and then I do the podcast, which really is the anchor of the whole thing, which is where I started from every single week. So when we were talking about that LAPC hand, like the podcast that I did this week that came out today was actually a review of 3 LAPC hands. Now, the site is a cash game training site for the most part,
right.
But when I play in these 10,000 events, I will review those hands because I think that the concepts are really applicable to cash games, because usually you're so deep.
Exactly.
And that's that aces versus kings hand, I think, is for sure applicable in terms of the thought process.
Exactly. So if online poker gets passed in California, will some of the content you have kind of gear a little bit towards online play?
If online poker were to come back in California, sure. I mean, we have the infrastructure. Yeah, we would do online videos for sure. I mean, I just was at these American Poker Awards on Friday, where they did these panels talking about poker in the future, and just all these kind of industry experts. Online poker is not coming back to California like anytime soon. It's sad to say that it's just, like they were talking about. I mean, even the guys that were like the most optimistic were talking about it maybe being in like 2020. And I'm talking about in California,
mm-hmm.
And that's if I mean, I don't think it would pass, but that's if there's no reinstatement of the Wire Act with Sheldon Adelson, who's constantly trying to do, but he'll probably pass on before anything would be passed like that at a federal level. But one of the things people don't understand about California is like the most upside down state government in the country. Like if you Google, people don't believe that. If you Google like best and worst like state governments, California is always number 50. Because it's like entirely dysfunctional. I mean, the state was like bankrupt. You know what I mean? It's got the highest tax rates, but there's always problems. Over the last year or two, there's been less of a budget deficit than there has been in previous years. So they're not so desperate for like something to bring in revenue. As my tax accountant Russ Fox says, it's never going to happen in an election year. So it will never happen in an odd. I think it's an odd year. Never happened in an odd year. So you've got that. So it can only ever pass every other year just by default. And, when you look at the way that these smaller states have overestimated the amount of revenue that they were going to get from taxes, as it relates to online poker, I don't see it happening, really. 2020 maybe is optimistic. So, sure, if it came back, we'd do it. But I don't think online poker's really has a future in the U.S. At least anytime like in the future.
Right, anytime in the super near future. So if it does come back, will you change the name of your company?
No. We've come to this branding. I've changed my brand like 100 times, and this is the one that we're gonna go with.
Awesome. All right, so this is the last question before we open up a little Q&A. So many members want to see a Crush Live Poker / Red Chip Poker duel. So is that something that can happen? I was thinking maybe we do like a 1-2 No Limit during the summer and just stream it for the fans.
I mean, sure. I'm gonna be busy and stuff. If we have time, sure. You mean like stream it like on Twitch,
Yeah. Or
like with hole cards?
Yeah.
I mean, you guys could come and we could. Well, I don't know if Live with the Bike would want me to do that. I was gonna say you guys could come and play on Live with the Bike, which you could see the hole cards, but that's obviously in LA. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to whatever. It's just I don't know if with Tuchman does all the World Series broadcasts. I'm gonna be playing in basically every event. I know David Chan doesn't really come out to Vegas, nor does Lyman. So we'll see.
We'll see.
I'm not close to the idea. I just don't know if it's necessarily going to be possible.
Awesome. All right, so that is all the questions I have for you. So we'll open up a little Q&A for a couple minutes, and then we'll call it an interview.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Q&A open. So I think there's like a 10 to 20 second delay. So.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Okay. So first question comes from Adendi. What's the best way to rebuild your game from scratch, and/or best advice for live 1-2-2-5 grinders to move up stakes?
Best way to build your game from scratch. I would go to training material if you're talking about live training material. You can choose the training material that you want. Obviously, I would plug my own site. It's really tough. I don't know if I have read. I mean, Ed Miller's done some good work in terms of like live no limit. I mean, the real problem is that depending on where they live, it's very difficult to build a bankroll from scratch where I live.
Right.
Because of the drop structure. People don't quite understand that Southern California, it's a drop and not a rake, which means that, if you're playing 2-5 $500 cap, if one person limps in mid position and then the small blind completes, no matter how big the pot is, after the flop, they take the entire drop, which is now, I believe, $6 plus 1 for the bad beat jackpot.
Wow.
So they take $7 anytime there's any flop. And it's pretty much the same all the way down. Like, it's probably the same for a 1-3 300 cap game. It makes it almost unplayable to play in any game that's below a $5 game in LA. Unplayable in the sense that you're never going to be able to save money doing it. So, I mean, I've heard in Vegas, it's better than that. But it's definitely going to be very, very tough to build a bankroll from scratch. I would always highly recommend playing on the side, keeping a job, not doing it full time. I mean, that's really the key. When you see the people that are the most successful people in poker anyways, most of them nowadays don't just play poker. You move on to other things. That's kind of what I've done. And now, I play on the side, like 100 hours a month. I like to keep the content fresh. I still love playing poker. But, to grind, I can't imagine grinding like 2,000 hours a year.
Yeah, it's tough.
Because now, if you're really good enough to do that for a living, you're talented in other ways, and you probably can make more money doing something else too,
Yeah, for sure. Another question that comes in is, what do you think is the biggest leak of all live 2-5 players?
I mean, there's several leaks. Several big leaks are not value betting enough. I mean, that's one that would, it's going to immediately increase your win rate is, value betting, especially in position thinly. I mean, you've got to value bet the river. You've got to not be scared of getting raised. So you need to, make value bets basically. I mean, there's just, ludicrous spots at 2-5 when people check behind like the best hand because, and again, this gets back to like bet folding and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, if I bet here and the guy raises me, I don't know what to do. This is a classic, like, get inside a recreational player's head, right? If I bet and he raises me, I don't know what to do. And when that's happened to that guy, he bets and someone raises him, he's just not able to fold. He's not physically able to fold. So the way that he patches that leak up is he just doesn't bet at the end. And the thing that's so extraordinarily illogical about that thinking is that, especially on the river, when you get check raised on the river at 2-5, it's so seldom ever a bluff that like betting for value in position is like a free roll. Because when you're raised, you're almost never getting bluffed.
Right.
So why you would ever have that as a part of your game to not bet because you don't want to get raised is pretty ridiculous. So I would say for the most part, it's not making thin enough value bets really. And then also too, I mean, there's a lot of people that make like just egregious pre-flop flat calling mistakes where they're just not deep enough to call with like suited connectors, gap suited connectors, pocket pairs, things like that. So, whenever I do a live at the bike show, and whenever we do low stakes games, like even super low stakes games, like really restricted buy-in, say like a $1-200 buy-in or an $80 buy-in, people just make pre-flop mistakes every single hand. Yeah. When you're 40 or 50 big blinds deep, you almost can't flat call any hand when someone opens to 4 or 5x. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But you just see it all the time.
For sure. So another question that comes in is, do you think the 1-2 game at Commerce is beatable given the drop and the super small buy-in structure? I know you briefly spoke about that, but that question just came in.
I don't know if split suit is thinking 1-2 is like a 200 buy-in like it is in Vegas, because there's no real 1-2 game at Commerce. The 1-2 game at Commerce is a $40 buy-in, or it's an $80 buy-in, and no, it's definitely not beatable. There's 1-2, and then there's at the bike there's a 100 to 300 buy-in with a 1-3 blind structure. Again, these are all flat drops. At Commerce, there's 2-5 with a 200 buy-in. Now, some of those games might be beatable for like pennies an hour, but usually the first game that you're going to be able to beat for a legitimate win rate is probably, a $500 buy-in game, which is what Commerce has. It's like a 5-5, 500 cap game. And then the bike's got a 5-5, 300 to 1,000 game. But once you get below that, yeah, it's with a flat drop structure.
Tuto.
I mean, yeah, just do the math out. It's pretty difficult.
So Ring Dog says, how would we play Queen 7 of Spades when a short stack raises from early position?
Rim Dog's talking about when we were playing in a 1-2 game in the Dominican Republic when I overlimped like 4 limpers, and then a guy with like $80 at 1-2 raised it to like 15, and 3 people called and I called behind, and for some reason he couldn't actually. He still can't compartmentalize the fact that I was on vacation and I was playing a 1-2 game and I didn't want to fold even though it wasn't a proper call pre-flop. So that's what he's referring to. It's not technically sound to do that, but I was about 8 El Presidentes in and 3 cigars in at 1 in the morning at a 1-2 game in Punta Cana at the Hard Rock Casino. So, yeah, so
not there to
but
fold.
He just texted me about a hand where he called in a tournament. Some guys raised with King 5 suited, like 25. I'm not the pre-flop police, but obviously you can make some pretty egregious mistakes pre-flop.
The pre-flop police. So this question comes from Guapa. He says, can you talk about bumping down in stakes from 5-10 to 2-5 when games dry up or bankroll issues? How do you adjust your mindset for smaller games you are used to?
Well, I mean, it's less. I mean, I don't have a specific answer to that. You just have to realize that when you move down in stakes, people are not going to be as sophisticated as they are at the top stakes. So, probably less bluffing should go on and just more playing solid. The lower that you go, the more that solid, straight up ABC play is going to be the best approach to the game.
Right.
So when you're moving down, you have to play more ABC and more solid. There's just, the stacks are usually shorter by proportion. The cap might be shorter. You're not going to have any maneuverability to get people off of hands, and they're not capable of folding hands either. Now, on the flip side to that, you need to be trying to maximize, your value, because you're using that information too that people are going to get pot committed, and they're not capable of folding top pair. So you've got to, adjust your lines to try to win the most amount of money with that, type of thought going in.
For sure. So we'll do probably another like 10 minutes and then we'll call it. I don't want to keep you forever, for sure. So we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll let Bart Hanson go. So RM 518 says, when a tournament player raises 2.5x to 3x on the flop on a wet board in a cash game, would you weight that more towards a draw or a top pair type hand? Do you think they play backwards and slow play monsters?
When a tournament player raises 2.5 to 3x, I mean, obviously each situation depends. What I will say about tournament players is that they're probably going to be more likely to raise top pair for protection as opposed to a more experienced cash game player that might be more aware of the concept of way ahead, way behind. And that actually can sometimes work the other way around for cash game players too when you go into tournaments. And I've been guilty of this where if a guy's not going to bluff later on in the hand, in a tournament, it actually can be correct just to end the hand and take the hand down. Tournaments different than cash games where if you win chips, it actually inherently gives you more of an advantage. Where in a cash game, it's irrelevant besides the pure equity part that we talked about. But you wouldn't take a line that would end the hand in a cash game. But in a tournament, if I have pocket jacks and, we're in a 3 or a 4 bet pot and the board comes out 9 high and the guy bets out and I don't think he's going to bluff. I'm basically ready to go with it, and I don't think he's going to bluff at it anymore with 2 overcards on the turn. Then if I just call, I'm kind of giving him a free shot at 6 outs on the turn. You know what I mean? So that's a little bit different. But yeah, when a tournament player comes into a cash game, they will definitely overplay top pair, types of hands.
Yeah, I agree. Odd Andy says, what's the minimal bankroll to take a shot at 510 for the first time in Vegas?
Well, I mean, that's a very complex, player-dependent, situational question. I mean, you don't have to have any bankroll if you have another job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can replenish your bankroll. If you're shot taking and you're a professional player, that's one thing. If you have a set amount of money and if you lose that money, you're out on the street and you'll only play poker, that's a whole nother thing. We talk about risk of ruin. Like, someone thought it was outrageous that on the forums we talked about saying that what's a bankroll for 2-5? And then when we talked with this Lyman and I, when we really got down to what the guy's situation was, it was that third example where he was like, if I lose my money, I'm homeless. The only way that I get money is from poker. Okay, that was his extreme situation. Then we said that if you're going to play 2-5 full time, you should have like $50,000, maybe even more than that, to eliminate your risk of ruin. People are like, oh my god, that's so outrageous. You wouldn't need that much money. And sure, I mean, I've never had more than if you're a really good player, you're not going to have more than a 4 or 5K downswing. But there's variance in everything. There's variance in risk of ruin and stuff too.
Yeah.
But most people are not in situation 30. They either have the side job or they're doing it for fun. So you don't. I mean, there is something to be said though too about playing in the lower stakes and kind of earning time before you move up. Or sometimes people play better when they know that they've earned the money at the lower stakes and then have moved up. Right. I mean, I always tell my students that to make money in poker, it's always a race to the $5 blind level, because the difference between whatever it is, 2-3 or 1-2 and 2-5, especially when there's a bigger game than 2-5 in the room or a bigger game in the city than 2-5 in that city, the difference is negligible. It's just more money. The player skill level is really negligible, so you're just really getting eaten alive at 1-2 and 2-3 by the proportion of the rake, and you're not really getting into any type of situations, more advanced situations, because the stacks are so restricted. It's not really teaching you much. You're not gaining anything by playing 2-3 over 2-5. So I think it's always a race to 2-5. With that being said, some people want to put the time in at the lower levels to kind of earn respect for the game to move up. I understand that too, but
makes sense.
Bankroll is different for everybody.
So another question that is coming from Persuadio, and he says, what do you think are the general leaks of your own subscribers at CLP?
My own subscribers. Well, I do a call-in show on Sunday nights on Twitch, right? 4:45 Pacific. All the shows that we do on Twitch are free. They just go up as podcasts for the subscribers. So, when Lyman does his show at 6 on Monday, you can always watch it for free and listen to it for free. But then if you want to listen to it later, you have to be a subscriber. Same thing with the call-in show.
Mm-hmm.
The most common leak that people call in with, or just the thing that I always like 80 or 90% of where I disagree when these callers call in, is sizing, bet sizing. Whether it's too small or too large, I usually disagree with their sizing for what they want to accomplish. It's probably more that they're not betting large enough for value, but then there are sometimes when they bet too much too, way ahead, way behind situations, things like that. But yeah, it's a lot of betting usually too small with value hands on the flop, and also, sizing is kind of an exponential thing. Like, for example, if a pot in a 2-5 game or a 5-10 game is $150 on the turn, okay, and a guy bets 80 and he gets called, well, now the pot's 310. Well, if we follow up with a 2/3 pot size bet on the river, that's 200. Now, instead, if we bet 125 on the turn and the guy calls, well, now the pot's 400. And if we follow up with a 2/3 pot size bet, on the turn now, we're looking at like 260, 270. So you can start this from pre-flop. Mm-hmm. If you add an extra $5 or $10 pre-flop to a value hand, and then on the flop, you bet 20% more than what you did, or 25% more, and then on the turn, the same thing, it's going to lead to like a river bet of almost 100% more. I mean, I just did that on the fly, but what I'm saying is that like small amounts of larger bets on previous streets will allow you to bet the same, basically a lot in terms of real money, the same percentage on the river. It's actually going to be a lot more in real money. So that's what you got to think about with your value hands.
For sure. So Jabberwocky asked, do you think the $565 buy-in, I think that's called the Colossus or something?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, the WSOP is plus EV for a good player. The rake is $65 plus tax considerations for the big cashes.
Oh yeah, I mean, sure, absolutely. I think that they're putting a $5 million guarantee on that event, which is basically says that they're going to get 10,000 entries. That event is a 4-flight reentry. Remember, they only used to have Million Maker, which was I guess maybe the little one drop or something like that as reentry. But yeah, I mean, people are going to be coming out of the woodwork for that event. Now, what's your EV in that event? Remember, it's not going to be a deep event. So it's a lottery. I mean, again, I'll take something out of Lyman's book. It's a lottery ticket. It really is. I mean, in these events are lottery tickets where if you're a really good player, maybe you have 10 tickets. Maybe if you're a really bad player, you have 0 tickets. You know what I mean? Some guys that aren't that bad might have 1 or 2 tickets. But it's still a lottery, though. You know what I mean? It's still like you're still trying to win like a lottery, whether you have more of an advantage or not. And the shorter and the faster the structure is, the more that it is, a lottery. But I mean, at 10, what is that? Maybe 11, 12%. If you look at these local LA tournaments that charge like $250 now, which is like 25%. Yeah, I mean, even at 10, 11%, I think that it's yeah, sure, it's plus EV.
Yeah.
But, is your hourly going to be the same in that event as it is like if you're a really good 2-5 no limit cash game player? No. Are you going to be able to win $1 million in one session at 2-5 cash game? No.
Never.
Are you going to be able to win 6 figures at a 2-5 cash game? No. And that's what, keeps people, chasing after that.
Yeah, it's definitely
the dream.
Definitely the chase for the glory, right?
Yeah.
All right. So with that, I think I will wrap up this interview. I think we definitely covered a lot of topics. So I definitely like to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I hope we could go on your stuff a couple of times, and I don't want to make it seem like it's a one-way street. So for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've had Ed on a few times. Ed's come on the Lyman show and he's come on the podcast. But yeah, absolutely, for sure. Do you guys archive your videos too on your channel here?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
And it's just always up?
They archive for 30 days and then it goes away. But I will if you like, I will send you this interview for sure for whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, it would be cool if we could put it up as an audio or something.
Yeah,
somewhere for free.
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
I agree for sure. All right, guys. So I really hope you enjoyed this interview with awesome Bart Hanson. And with that said, peace.
All right, take it easy.